Contemporary issues in sport 13.2. Violence. Violence has always been a big problem in football. This is because it has always had a fierce atmosphere and the game originated from mob football. This is where mass crowds would form in the middle of streets and villages, and they would all bundle together fighting over the ball. Now the game is not nearly as violent, but the spectators have not changed like the football has. Violence has always been an issue in football as it's part of the culture for the fans to get vicious and angry. A big problem in football is hooliganism. This is when groups of people who support the same club and that mates, sometimes outside of football, get drunk and then become destructive. The term hooliganism is British slang for criminal gang. Conflict between hooligans may happen before, after, or during a match and is more likely to happen in a derby where there is a rivalry. They often have planned fights away from the stadiums to avoid the police getting involved, but conflict can also erupt around stadiums spontaneously or even inside the stadium. Hooligans that have the money and time may follow their national country to away matches and engage in hooligan behaviour against the opposing teams. Hooligans often use names to indicate their firms, and if at a national game, they might make an alliance with another firm. Historically, violence has been a big part of football. Violence has been associated with football since its early beginnings in the 13th century in England. The original game was called mob football. This is where mass crowds would gather, consisting of people from the same village, and they would play in a massive field with hundreds of people on either team, unlike today, where each team has 11 players on the field. In mob football, the game was more similar to rugby. This is because they were allowed to carry the ball with their hands, whereas the only player in football allowed to do this is the goalkeeper. Over the years, the game became more civilized, however, it has never lost the fiery aspect from the spectators. Unlike rugby, which originated from being a posh sport and therefore a lot more of a respectful sport to watch and play, the game of football has always had the aspect of drinking around it, and not too long ago, even the players were getting drunk before their game day. This was happening in the 1980s with the Liverpool team, as they were known for getting in brawls outside pubs as they were drunk. This also happens with the spectators, as drinking can have an effect of making someone angry, and it's part of the football culture as it has been going on since the very beginning. Because of the violent aspect around football, these days parents are not willing to take their children to the matches as they believe it is far too dangerous to do so. This is disappointing because this just should never happen and people should feel safe watching a top flight game. A, a club that has tried to combat this is Aston Villa. They have done this by not selling alcohol in certain stands. This will stop hooligans from watching the game in those stands, and therefore people will feel safer bringing their children to watch there. Another thing that clubs have done is they have created family stands. This eliminates the chance of hooligans spectating there, and people who don't like the violent aspect of the sport will watch from here, and they will feel a lot better watching there with their children. where they aren't exposed to the violent gestures and language. The violence from the spectators affects the police force as well massively. This is because they have to distribute a lot of officers to each game around the stadiums and the nearby stations to help prevent a fight breaking out. In some cases, at rival matches, the officers will be provided with riot shields to keep the crowds under control. There are many different reasons why there is violence in football. One reason is that some spectators do it to escape from their boring life in their office job. They become violent and get drunk at games, as that's the only thing that they enjoy, and it helps them let off some steam. You will often find that hooligans are very well educated and have prestigious jobs. For example, some are lawyers or accountants. Another reason that there is violence is because people enjoy the adrenaline rush of being in a fight, and they go to the game looking for someone to fight. Sometimes fights are even planned before the game. This happens a lot because clubs often have anger for each other over past experience of playing against each other, whether they are just local rivals. Violence has no positive effects on the game apart from the entertainment of a very few spectators that are labelled as hooligans. A negative of violence is that the sport gets bad publicity. This ruins the sport in the way that people decide not to take an interest in it as they don't want to be associated with it. This means that less parents will allow their children to play football, and more people will disrespect the sport, giving it a worse reputation. This has always been an issue, as the more wealthy families who send their children to private schools would rather than play rugby or cricket, as these sports are seen as being more civilized. These days there are more security at games, and if there is tension between the clubs, they will not sell out the stadium and often leave the stand of seats between the home and away fans empty. This makes the job of the police much easier, as they have less people they need to control. The changes that have been made in football have helped the amount of violence in the sport. However, the game has not benefited from these changes, as the atmosphere is much worse than what it used to be. An example of this is the Premier League. There will be empty stands, all because the club won't sell tickets to the fans, as they believe it's too many people to have to control. After exploring this, I believe that violence will always have some part in football, as it is in the culture of it. However, I believe that there are rules that can be put in place to make it safer for people to go and watch and for it to become less violent. I also believe that in-game violence will always be a problem, as players' arousal levels are high and they will want to win. Therefore, they will do anything to do so.